24th, 2023, Beaverton Urban Redevelopment Agency meeting to order. Will the recorder please call the roll?
Board Member Beatty?
Here.
Duggar? Hartmeyer-Prigg?
Here.
Hudson?
Here.
Kim?
Here.
Kimmy?
Here.
Teeter? Tivnon?
Here.
Olvin? Bitco? Marking excused. And Walton.
I see Walton. Walton? Okay.
And I think Olvin just joined as well. Olvin, are you present?
I am present.
Okay, thank you. We'll mark you present.
Amazing. First on our agenda, we've got visitor comment. City recorder, do we have anyone here to address Bureau?
We do not.
Okay. We're now moving to board communications. Does any board member have any communications to share with us this evening? Okay, I just want to make a 30-second. Last couple of days, the news has been really heavy in some of our communities, specifically the AAPI communities. So just want to tell y'all to check in on your elders. It's been weighing really heavily on me today. Consent agenda. Looks like we've got meeting minutes to consider this evening for Bureau's October 25th meeting. Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair, I move that we pass the minutes as directed.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Will the recorder call vote?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear who that second was.
Tivnon.
Thank you. Beatty?
Yes.
Duggar? Thought he joined. Did we see him join? Okay, I don't know if he's quite logged on. Hartmeyer-Prigg?
Yes.
Hudson?
Yes.
Kim?
Yes.
Kimmy?
Yes.
Tivnon?
Yes.
Olvin?
Yes.
Walton?
Yes.
Okay. First order of business, we have the election of our Bureau officers for 2023. Had a pleasure serving in this last year and want to make sure that share the wealth and let someone else take over. So I'm accepting nominations. Councillor Kimmy.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Allison Tivnon.
Okay, I can take any other nominations if anyone else is interested. With that, I believe Councillor Tivnon has been. Do I have to do a vote, Kirby, Bill?
Yes, you do.
Okay.
You can do by unanimous consent.
Okay. By unanimous consent, I'm now passing over the imaginary gavel to Chair Tivnon.
Thank you, Councillor Hassan, and thank you for always being a teacher in your role, no matter which one it might be. I've really appreciated how you've conducted yourself as chair of Bureau, and I hope that I can live up to that. So let's move on to the rest of tonight's business. Agenda Bill 2023, sorry, Bureau Bill 20.
Actually, excuse me, Chair Tivnon, and welcome. We should also elect a vice chair.
Oh, yes, of course. So do we have any nominations for vice chair?
I'll jump in. I'll nominate board member like Sarah. Board member Walton for vice chair.
Okay.
Second.
Are there any other nominations? Okay, then by unanimous consent, I believe we have our vice chair, member Sarah Walton. Congratulations. Thank you as I get my footing at being the chair. I believe we are done with elections now, and we'll be moving on to other business. All right. Okay, so then moving on to Bureau Bill 2023-40, Urban Renewal Advisory Committee 2022 Advisory Report. Staff, can you please introduce yourself and take it from here?
Hi, Councilmember Tivnon. One moment. I believe we will be getting this report this evening from last year's URAC chair, Eric Lair. Tyler, do you have anything else you'd like to say?
I do. It's my pleasure, actually, to have Mr. Lair here tonight. He has been a long-time URAC member. He's also part of our Urban Renewal Budget Committee. Eric is also involved with BCCI and is NAC. He's been a quality individual on our advisory committee, and it's going to be exciting to have him here, and he will continue to be on URAC for the coming year. Eric, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Tyler, and thank you to the Bureau Board, and congrats, new Chair Tivnon. And Chase, I think you're going to share the slides out. Perfect. All right. So, as Tyler mentioned, I'm the outgoing chair of URAC, and really there were three, I would say, broad themes that as a committee we focused on this year, and I'm going to tie each of those into some of the initiatives, some of the projects that we learned about from staff, starting with DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. Also, I would say climate, sustainability, and I'll lump accessibility in there as well. And then finally, the idea of community development, community engagement. So I want to start with the downtown equity strategy, which I think it's really important because this strategy addresses a lot of the concerns that people tend to have about urban renewal, concerns about displacement, racial equity, community engagement. So it's been so encouraging to learn about the equity strategy, to see all the improvement, the changes. I know that Rachel and her team have been in front of the Bureau Board as well. So it's very exciting to see how this plan is developed and to see where it's going to go from here. Next slide, please. Also, our new governor just declared a state of emergency with respect to homelessness. And certainly a part of a solution to homelessness is going to involve housing. But at the same time, we have to balance things like a limited amount of buildable land. And if we add housing, as we add density, making sure that we're preserving the community that we love, that we all want to live in. And, these are things, of course, that are addressed by the Housing Beaverton project. Next slide, please. Moving on to more of that sustainability and accessibility theme. Certainly, we, of course, want as many people to be able to come downtown as possible, to access the businesses and the amenities and so on. And to the extent that people can come using mass transit, that they can walk, they can bike, that's great. We know that doesn't work for everybody. Some people are going to have to drive downtown. And if they do so, it's really not ideal if they have to drive around in circles looking for a parking spot. So part of what's addressed by the parking management action plan is, hey, can we find people a place to park? If they're driving downtown in an EV, can they have access to charging? For those people for whom it's harder to move around, are they able to find spots close to the businesses they're trying to go to rather than just get discouraged and go home? So it's been great to hear about how the city is trying to address that with the parking management action plan. Next slide, please. Also, we've heard a lot about what's going on over on Western. Certainly some of this has to do with economic development, with the West 5 strategy, but you can see some of the themes about accessibility. They're improving the turn lanes, the pedestrian and the bike pathways, adding transit stops, improving the stormwater facilities. So it's really good to see that progress. Next slide, please. And then the idea of community development, I think the First Street Dining Commons is such a great example of this. We've really created an area that feels communal, right? We've made that part of downtown, of Restaurant Row, a destination rather than someplace you just drive by looking for parking while you may pop in and out of a restaurant. I mean, I don't know if there's any good way to determine this, but I would, I bet a lot of money that adding the dining commons saved some of the businesses downtown, and I think that's really important. And I think it's great that the Bureau board has also been supportive of this, continuing at least in the near term. That certainly makes me happy to see. Next slide, please. Also, we heard a lot from Katie Kiyotami about the different grants program, the storefront improvement, tenant improvement, which of course now been combined into the even better building improvement program. We've got a couple pictures here of Royal Legion, of UB Sushi, and the transformation that these grant programs led to is pretty phenomenal. So really good to see that going on, really helping out these local businesses. Next slide, please. Aside from the things that I just talked about, we did get to learn a lot about what Bureau is doing with property, the property that you all are acquiring, how you're planning to manage and develop it, and how those development plans fit with all the things we just talked about, how we're making the city more inclusive, more accessible, and really just a better place to come visit. Next slide, please. We also got some updates on other projects, like the Downtown Loop, the Milliken Way Extension, the Parks and Open Space Framework. Again, with the idea of let's make downtown more inviting. Let's make this a place that people want to come. Next slide, please. Probably the highlight of the year for myself and a number of the other committee members was we had the opportunity to do a walking tour of downtown. It's one thing to hear about these projects sort of in the abstract as we're all looking at them on a computer screen from home because we're still doing Zoom meetings. It's a very different thing to actually get to walk around, to see these places up close, to go in the businesses, really get a sense of not only the vibrancy of downtown, but what Bureau has been able to do with these various projects and initiatives. And you can see from the map here, Chase just drew up a fantastic tour for us, starting at the Round, going by the PRCA and the parking garage, down Rose BG by the food cartels, over by the BC2 site, across Canyon to Broadway, all up and down Broadway, and then ending at the Dining Commons. So really, really good experience and very well received by the committee. So thank you, Chase. Next slide. One thing I really wanted to highlight this year had to do with engagement and feedback, particularly from staff. So at the end of each year, Tyler and Chase will ask the committee, hey guys, what do you think went well last year? And what do you think maybe could have gone better? And the response that the committee gave in 2021 was, we'd like to understand a little better what's happening with the feedback that we're giving. So staff will come, they'll present to us, they'll answer our questions, that they'll take our comments, but it wasn't always clear what happened after that. I mean, is staff incorporating what we're saying? Are they communicating it to you all on the board? Is it just going into the abyss? Like, we just really didn't know. And we communicated that to Tyler and Chase, and as a result, in 2022, when staff would come present, along with telling us what was going on, giving us updates, they made an intentional effort to say, hey guys, remember when we talked to you a couple years ago and you said XYZ? Well, here's how that was incorporated. So we got the opportunity to see what happened with our feedback, and that's really, as a community volunteer, that's really gratifying and really rewarding to know that, look, the city, the Bureau, you guys are listening to us. It's not performative. We really are serving a role and helping to affect change. So I really did want to call out staff, because that was something that was, we brought up an issue, it was addressed, and it's fantastic. Next slide, please. And the last thing I'll leave you all with, because again, we're a community advisory committee. You guys are the ones who are making the hard decisions. Is there anything that we as a committee can be doing to make your job easier? You know, is there anything that we can do to help you all? Because that's really what we're here for. So with that, again, I just want to thank you all for giving me a few minutes today and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Are there any questions or discussion from members? Nadia? Counselor Hassan?
Hey, Eric, just want to thank you for the presentation and want to put out there that I would like to participate in this walking tour in the future. Note to staff. Thanks.
Board Member Walton?
It'll be a day when we will go by Sarah, but that day is not today. I just want to say thank you, Eric. I think that was an excellent presentation. Summary. It's actually sort of, I felt like it was like a memory lane walkthrough for us too. Like, oh yeah, we did talk about that, and that was sort of the highlight. So thank you. And I think having been on URAC and now being on Vera, sort of like understanding the two things. I think it's like just asking the questions and peppering staff when they come, because I think that is helpful. It gives them sort of an opportunity. I don't want to speak for them, but to sort of work through some of those things before sort of it comes to a decision point. And so just know that that is helpful. And sort of seeing both sides of that coin, I can sort of, relay that to you. So maybe relay that to the group. But I think just like asking the right questions, being super engaged. And if you don't agree with something, don't sort of agree that you have to agree with it just because it's being presented to you. Sort of ask the right questions and poke holes. Because then the work will get better before it gets to the decision point. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in? Okay, I'll round things out just by saying I really appreciated what you said there towards the end about the community engagement. And I think it's not only important to go back and reference past engagement feedback and how it was used, but it's also good to remember that so that you ask new questions and just allow people to be able to build off of the ideas of the past. So that's really, really awesome. And hopefully there's more of that across all of the outreach efforts at the city. So thank you very much, Eric, for your time. We will be moving on to the next Bureau bill. That is 2023-41, Central Beaverton Urban Renewal Plan Review and Agency Financial Projections. So staff, can you please introduce yourself and take it away?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Chair. So tonight, this is January. This is where we start things off for the year. And we have some new Bureau Board members. Welcome, Mr. Teeter, to your first official Bureau Board meeting. I'm glad you're able to make it tonight. It's kind of a good point in time for all of us to either get refreshed, learn something, or just kind of remember where urban renewal in Beaverton has been and where it is today and where it could be going in the future. We've been very successful in the last 11 years of doing a lot of work from a lot of different angles in order to make successful pieces coming together in this big puzzle that we call our downtown and our urban renewal district. Tonight, I'm happy to introduce, and some of you may recognize Nick Popenick from Tiberius Solutions. Nick has been doing our financial projections over the last 11 years. In fact, he was with Echo Northwest at the time that the Central Beaverton Urban Renewal Plan was devised and did those original projections. Where are we going? How's this all going to work? And so Nick is out on his own for the last number of years, and we keep knocking on his door for help. And we're kind of looking at this as kind of three different buckets tonight. One is a Urban Renewal 101, and it's just a nice reminder, or you may learn something new about urban renewal in the state of Oregon. Second part, and Nick is going to be doing that. Staff Chase Landry is going to be doing Beaverton's plan. What is this thing? And it's going to be a nice reminder and kickoff for the year of where we are in our plan. And then Nick's going to come back and talk a little bit about financial projections and where do we go from here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Papanik.
All right. Thank you very much, Tyler. And thank you all board members for having me here tonight. Several of you, it's my first time giving a presentation for you. Others have been in public meetings with me many times for the last many years. If I happen to drop off the call tonight, I suspect that board member Olvin would be able to just pick up the slideshow and run with it for all the times that we've been in public meetings together. So we will just kind of do this first portion to just talk about how urban renewal in the state of Oregon works and lead that into your specific community. And so, Chase, are you able to start the PowerPoint slides? And I am here to serve you all. So if you have any questions at any point during this presentation, don't hesitate to interject and we can address them as we go along. So the next slide, at its core, urban renewal is fundamentally a form of property tax revenue. So before we go into anything on how urban renewal works, it's nice to have a refresher on Oregon's property tax system. And I've been doing this consulting work for a while and I've done work in, 7 or 8 different states. And it turns out just about every state has a very overly complicated and hard to understand property tax system. But they're all complicated in their own unique ways, and Oregon is no exception there. So in Oregon, one of the key features is that we have a clear distinction between a property's real market value and assessed value. And assessed value is what we calculate the property taxes on, and it tends to lag far, far below real market values of properties. And so you probably have seen in the news or you've seen on your own neighborhood homes for sale that real market values have been skyrocketing for the last couple of decades now. And assessed value has not been keeping up due to how our system is put in place. The maximum assessed value of a property is limited to only 3% growth per year. And so for any entity that's relying on property tax revenue, including urban renewal areas, you're going to be looking at 3% growth in assessed value per year, unless you can get exceptions to that 3% limit. And the most common exception that we're talking about is new construction. So when new construction occurs, that property is allowed to have its assessed value jump significantly and not be held to the 3% limit for that 1 year. Other common exceptions that come into play in an area like yours are the expiration of property tax abatements. For example, if a property was publicly owned and non-taxable, but then is sold to a private party, that can cause a jump in its assessed value. Or if the property was receiving an exemption or abatement for your vertical housing tax zone or for enterprise zone, those types of abatements, when they come off the tax rolls, also allow a jump in value. So really, when we're looking at the success of an urban renewal area, we're looking at, can there be enough construction activity that allows the growth here to go above 3% in a significant way to lead to a healthy cash flow? One of the things that makes it even more challenging is that when new construction does occur, it doesn't come onto the tax roll equal to its real market value, but it automatically gets a haircut in the very first year that it comes onto the tax roll. And that's based on the changed property ratios. That's a ratio that's calculated for each county and for each land use type in the county. And it's equal to the ratio of total assessed value to total real market value for all the properties of that type. So they look at, for example, every single family home in the county and add up its assessed value and real market value, and they apply that ratio to new construction. We're at a place right now where, due to the very strong growth in real market value that's been occurring in recent years, that changed property ratios are very low. So as an example of that, changed property ratios for new multifamily construction in Washington County is down under 40%. So if somebody builds a new apartment building in the city of Beaverton and they spend $1 million on it, the taxable value of it is going to be less than $400,000, closer to $300,000. So that just goes to show that with our property tax system, it's tough to get growth above 3% per year. New construction is the key, but new construction has been losing some of its bang for its buck as that change property ratio has been declining steadily over time. A couple other key distinctions, the last couple of bullet points on this slide. There are different types of property tax rates. So all taxing districts can have a permanent rate. As implied by the name, that's a constant tax rate that's applied every single year with no ability to increase it. Then there's also general obligation bonds, which are temporary rates that are approved by voters to pay for capital projects, and local option levies that are temporary tax levies approved by voters to pay for operations. For most urban renewal areas, you're looking only at permanent rate levies that are impacted and not the bonds and local option levies. And then lastly, in Oregon's property tax system, you will often hear of Measure 5 property tax compression. So no property can pay more than $10 per thousand of real market value for general government tax purposes, and no more than $5 per thousand of real market value for education purposes. So those are limits that come into play right now because properties' real market values are so high relative to their taxable assessed values. We're not seeing a whole lot of compression in this area. The urban renewal area itself did not have any noticeable compression in the most recent year. Okay, so the next slide. Now that we've covered those fascinating basics of Oregon's property tax system, we can dig into more of the specifics on urban renewal. So what is urban renewal? Fundamentally, we're looking at a funding tool for economic development, and it's tied to implementation of adopted plans. So every urban renewal area is limited in scope and it's limited in geography, and those are tied to a plan that a city or county has to adopt through a very specific public process. Those urban renewal areas are again established through an ordinance. So the city has to adopt an ordinance to put one of these into effect. And then they generate revenue through the concept of tax increment financing. So tax increment financing is the funding mechanism, and it means that any of the growth in assessed value in the area, whether that comes from new construction or appreciation, that growth is multiplied by the overlapping tax rates of all the affected taxing districts, and that revenue goes to the urban renewal area specifically. So it's a redirection of existing property tax revenues. When we look at the assessed value of the area when it's first created, that value is known as the frozen base. And the taxes from the frozen base will continue to go to the overlapping taxing districts in perpetuity. So the overlapping taxing districts don't see a reduction in their funding level, but they see a freeze in their funding level. And so if your urban renewal area is around for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, those overlapping taxing districts are continuing to only collect the same amount of tax revenue that they were receiving in year one. And they have to wait until the area closes down before they start to see the benefit of the increased tax revenue. Again, any of the increase in assessed value in the area above the frozen base is known as the increment value. And then the consolidated tax rate is just the select tax rates that apply to your specific urban renewal area. And honestly, the laws governing this are very old and they've been amended a number of times. And so there are lots of different flavors of urban renewal plans that are out there. Anything new only gets to collect taxes from the permanent rate levies. Your plan is not quite that new. So you do get to include taxes that are from general obligation bonds that were approved by voters 20 years ago or longer. Though I can say now that the last of those bonds for your plan is finally expiring, and in all future years, your plan will only be collecting taxes from permanent rate levies, which simplifies things. The formula for understanding how much tax increment finance revenue, or TIF, that you'll receive every year is as simple as taking the increment value and multiplying it by the consolidated tax rate. And then one other wrinkle that will come into play, but has not come into play yet for your urban renewal area, is revenue sharing. And that says that over time, for areas that have been particularly successful at generating tax increment finance revenues, they'll reach a certain threshold defined in statute where they no longer get to collect all of that tax increment revenue, but a portion of it needs to start getting shared with the other taxing districts. And that just helps in areas that have very large amounts of increment that have been around for a very long time. They have to start sharing some of that with the overlapping taxing districts. On the next slide, we have a graph that illustrates this. And so again, you can see the blue or purple area on the bottom of the chart. That's the frozen base revenue. So when the area is first established, it has a certain amount of value, and the taxes from that value continue to go to the overlapping taxing districts. Over time, any increase in value in the area is what's reflected as increment in the yellow area of the chart, and that all goes specifically to the urban renewal area. Late in the life of the district, there may be revenue sharing. That is the small teal portion in the corner of the graph there. And then eventually the area will meet its final date and will close down. And then all of that tax revenue will then go to the overlapping taxing districts. So the next slide, we get into what are the impacts of urban renewal. It's important to note that urban renewal does not increase taxes. There is no impact on any property owners or taxpayers. So any property owner is going to receive the same dollar amount of tax bill. It's just that their tax revenues are going to be divided into different places. So if the property owners are not impacted, who is? And the answer to that is the overlapping taxing districts. So there isn't any free lunch. There's no free money. Every dollar of tax increment finance revenue that goes to the urban renewal agency is a dollar of revenue that's being foregone from the other taxing districts. That includes the city's general fund. One key note on these impacts is that it's difficult to talk about the impacts to school districts. The way that we typically say this is that it's not directly impacted. And that's because in Oregon, there is a state school fund, and the legislature sets funding targets per student across the entire state with adjustments for different demographic factors. But every school district has to achieve the same level of funding. And so when anything happens with the local property tax revenues to a school district, whether that's positive and they get surplus revenues or negative and they lose revenues, the state changes the amount of the grant from the state school fund to make sure that they are still hitting the same targeted funding level as every other school district in the state. So the school districts are not directly impacted, but all of the other overlapping taxing districts are impacted. Some limitations that exist in statute on urban renewal. One of the big ones is that you can't put your entire city into different urban renewal areas. You're capped on the total size that you can have for urban renewal areas, including assessed value and acreage. The thresholds are different depending on how large your city is by population, but for larger cities, including Beaverton, no more than 15% of the city's total acreage and assessed value can be included in urban renewal areas. And for the city of Beaverton, we're looking at right around 8% of your acreage and 7% of your assessed value that are included in the urban renewal area. So well within those limits. So the city would have capacity to create another urban renewal area if that was of interest. Some other limitations on the next slide. TIF revenue can only be spent on debt service. So that's actually not a statutory restriction, but a constitutional restriction. So you can only spend your revenue on debt service. However, the term debt has wound up being defined fairly broadly. And so one thing you'll see in a lot of communities are overnight loans, either from a bank or from a city's general fund, where money is loaned to the urban renewal area and then paid off the very next day. And that counts as debt service. But in reality, you're still only spending the cash that you're bringing in on an annual basis. Some other restrictions on the use of TIF revenue is that the debt that you're incurring, that you're spending your TIF on, can only be spent on capital projects. So you could use the money to build a park, but you couldn't use the money to hire people to maintain the park. Maintenance and operations is off limits. The projects that you fund with TIF must also be located inside the urban renewal area. So you can't take the money that's generated downtown and spend it somewhere else in the community. And likewise, those projects have to be demonstrated to be benefiting the urban renewal area. So it's not where you can say, well, the city hall is located or a public works facility is located inside of our boundary. Let's fund 100% of that with our tax increment financing, because the area isn't benefiting 100%. Those benefits are benefiting the entire broader community. And so you should be funding it proportionately. And lastly, any project that gets funded with tax increment financing has to be identified upfront in the urban renewal plan. So you can't just change the list of projects whenever you want to fund whatever new project is popular at that point in time. It has to be included in your adopted urban renewal plan. Another limit here is that each urban renewal area in the plan must state its maximum indebtedness. That's a key term, and it kind of sounds like your borrowing limit on a credit card, but in fact, the maximum indebtedness is cumulative over time. It's the total amount, the total principal cost of projects that any urban renewal area can fund over its lifespan. And so once an area has funded all the projects that add up to its maximum indebtedness, it can only pay off that debt, and then it has to close down. And in terms of the amount of maximum indebtedness, there are additional limitations on that, how large it can be up front and how much you can increase it by if you wanted to through amendments later on. So these other limitations on the screen now are not in statute, but are related to specifics for the city of Beaverton. So Beaverton City Charter says that the council shall not approve any urban renewal plan unless it's approved by a majority vote. So your plan actually had to go out to a public vote before it was approved. That is not required for all communities across the state. That's only for the city of Beaverton and a handful of others that have similar charter amendments. Similarly, it says that the agency board shall not be comprised exclusively of council members. And so you have a more broad and diverse composition of board members. Lots of other communities only have city council serve as their agency board members. And then because this plan was approved by voters, that results in some other limitations on your plan. So statements made by the city in the voters pamphlet asking for approval of the redevelopment plan are material statements that are used to interpret the plan. What does that mean? It means that the city included the amount of funding for specific categories of projects in the voters pamphlets. So those amounts must be substantially complied with. So to put this another way, if your plan had not been voted on by the public, you could choose over time to allocate resources differently to the list of projects that you have in your plan. You could still only spend money on projects in the plan, but you could shift money around from one category to another. But because voters specifically approved this plan with dollar amounts allocated to the individual project categories, you're held to those dollar amounts and have to pay attention to how much you're spending on each of those categories to make sure you're substantially complying with the original plan. The next slide. So plan amendments. This plan was adopted 12 years ago now, I believe. It's possible to amend plans from time to time, and other jurisdictions do that relatively frequently. There are two different types of plan amendments defined in statute. There are substantial amendments. This includes expanding the boundary any more than 1% of the original area, increasing the maximum indebtedness, adding certain types of public buildings. Any of those types of amendments must be adopted in the same manner as the original plan adoption. For Beaverton, that means a public vote. And so for Beaverton, that means that substantial plan amendments are not something to take lightly. They require a large public process, lots of public outreach if you were to ever try to substantially amend the plan. In addition to the vote, there's also agency meeting, planning commission meeting, public hearings, and then adopting an ordinance. So again, lots of process related to this. Minor amendments are any changes other than what's listed above, and those can be approved by resolution of the Bureau Board. But those are all, again, minor in nature and nothing that would change the fundamental tenets of your plan. All right, we're almost done with the overview of how urban renewal works. So thank you for bearing with me. This final subject is about program income. So we mentioned earlier that the fundamental revenue stream that's associated with urban renewal is tax increment financing. But urban renewal areas can receive money from other sources. And any other revenue that an urban renewal area receives is generally referred to as program income. Examples of program income, common examples, are proceeds from land sales, rents from property that is owned by the urban renewal agency, funds that are repaid by borrowers of various loan programs. If you have a tenant improvement program, for example, all those dollars coming back to the agency are not TIF dollars. They are separate. They are program income, and therefore they're not subject to the same restrictions as TIF. So that means that those dollars can be spent without counting against the maximum indebtedness limit. And over time, as you get closer and closer to your maximum indebtedness limit, and someday you will hit your maximum indebtedness limit. And that means you can't spend your TIF revenue on any other projects. But if you are developing a cash flow of program income, you can continue to use those revenue streams to fund economic development activities in the area. Now, what types of activities could you fund? Expenditures of program income are limited to the general powers granted to the Urban Renewal Agency by statute, but the language is really broad. It says you can engage in any other housing or community development activities that are specifically delegated to it by the governing body of the municipality. That means that Beaverton City Council could identify any specific housing or community development activity and charge Bureau with undertaking it, and then your program income could be eligible to fund that activity. So what are some best practices for using program income? The next slide shows us that you should always keep your program income in a separate account from your TIF revenue to avoid commingling funds. If you commingle these funds, it's really hard to decide whether this expenditure was an expenditure made with TIF or an expenditure made with other funds, and should it count against maximum indebtedness, et cetera. The use of program income should also be considered on a case-by-case basis with input from your agency counsel and bond counsel. So you want to make sure when you're spending these dollars that you aren't inadvertently affecting your maximum indebtedness or having some other complications. The use of program income that's consistent with projects and activities identified in your plan, that's generally accepted. That if you already identified in your plan that this is a project you want to do and you're spending the money inside the geographic boundary of your urban renewal area, that's a pretty safe bet. Anything else that you're looking to do with the money beyond that, a project that's not listed in the plan or spending it in an area outside of your urban renewal boundary, that's something where you're going to need to have, official approval or action by the city council to delegate that authority and responsibility to the urban renewal agency. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, program income long-term is a really valuable funding source that can continue to fund economic development even after your urban renewal area hits its maximum indebtedness. This is an opportunity to create holistic, strategic approach to ongoing economic development and revitalization of the district after it expires. Urban renewal areas have a finite lifespan, but downtowns are forever changing. There's always going to need to be something that can be improved in the downtown area. And program income is a good way to make that happen. I remember a decade or more ago, working with the city of Portland on case studies of other successful urban renewal agencies from across the country. And when you look at ones from back Northeast, where they may have had these urban renewal agencies around for close to a century now, a lot of them wound up developing very robust program income streams where they became property owners at one point in time and realized that the rents coming in from these properties or the proceeds from land sales gave them a sustainable funding stream that they could continue to use without relying on property tax revenue. Okay, with that, I think I'm going to take a break and turn things over to Chase. But are there any questions at this point in the presentation on how urban renewal works in general before we dive into how it works specifically for the city of Beaverton?
I have a quick question. So you said long-term, the program income can be used for economic development. So where do those funds go once the urban renewal district is done? Does it go to like the city's general fund or something?
Yeah, so if it were to go to the city's general fund, it would no longer be allowed to be spent on urban renewal agency activities. It would then be treated as general fund revenue, which has its own broad activities that it can be spent on, but a little bit different in terms of the types of economic development activities that can be spent on. When the district closes down, that's separate from the agency closing down. And so the agency can continue to exist even without the district. And the agency has its own budget and its own fund structure. And so you could continue to have the program income in the agency budget and spending it on agency activities that are separate from the specific plan.
Any other questions from Mr. Papanek?
And don't worry, I'll be back in 10 minutes to talk more about financial projections. So you'll have other chances.
Okay, thank you, Nick.
Okay, board, I'm going to take over from here for a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about the plan. Mr. Papanek has covered quite a bit already about what goes into urban renewal in Oregon, but let's talk about Beaverton. So over 10 years ago, that plan, the Central Beaverton Urban Renewal Plan, was approved by City of Beaverton voters. But there was a lot of work that went into it before that. So there was actually an earlier urban renewal plan in Beaverton in the 1970s. There was a plan that funded a lot of the road improvements and a lot of the infrastructure improvements that we see today, like Hall and Watson, some of the Farmington Road connections, and some of the issues dealing with rail downtown. However, after that urban renewal plan, it was decided that Beaverton no longer wanted to use urban renewal for many reasons. And so it was actually banned in the city of Oregon, or city of Beaverton, excuse me. However, coming back around to 2007, when the community vision process was kicking off, they were hearing a lot from people that they wanted to see more improvements to safety, accessibility, and other supports for the downtown economy. So looking around, city council and other folks said, well, this sure seems like something that urban renewal would be helpful to use, be a good tool for the job. So an amendment task force was brought together to look at the charter and see how could the charter of Beaverton be changed to allow urban renewal. And they came up with those amendments, a little bit of which Mr. Papanek shared earlier, saying that the plan had to be approved. Any plan would have to be approved by majority vote at a November or May election, and that the board needed to be comprised of more than just the city council members. And then this amendment was approved in 2008 by over 2/3 majority of Beaverton voters at that time. So City of Beaverton can now, at that point, do a renewal again. But they wanted to look into it first to make sure that we were doing it right. So they created a feasibility study and looked at a lot of those ORS requirements, spent a lot of time talking with the overlapping taxing districts and really building that agreement and understanding between the districts that would be impacted by this about the benefits of urban renewal in downtown Beaverton. Then a community advisory committee was created. And a new bureau board was put together, and they went out to the community with this draft plan, talked to hundreds of community members, and shared with them what actually was in that plan and what the Urban Renewal Agency would be doing over its time. So what is in that plan? Well, the plan defines, just like they said, the urban renewal boundaries, the maximum indebtedness for Beaverton, guiding goals, and then yes, it did get more specific than what was even required by ORS and went into the allocation percentages of how Bureau was to spend its funds. So here's the urban renewal area again, subdivided into 4 areas, over all the way to Murray on the west, up north to Walker Road, down south to 5th Avenue, and southeast to Allen, and a little bit past Western Ave. It was almost 1,000 total acres when it began, and began with a 777 million assessed property value. Talked a little bit already about how funding works for Beaverton, but the Beaverton was established with a $150 million maximum indebtedness limit or 30 years. And then also being able to use the sources of loans, bonds, and program income. The plan outlined the exact goals that Bureau was to fulfill, to work on engagement, to add value, support businesses, work on redevelopment, transportation, add housing, and promote arts and culture in the community. But it was not to be just at whatever priority level that folks wanted to set at that time, but was actually to be prioritized in the percentages that you can see here. So 48% of Bureau's funds, by the time it wraps up, are supposed to have gone to transportation and infrastructure. I won't bore you with the details right now. It actually gets down to a finer number. It's like 47.62, but 48 is what we're rounding it to here. 33% was joint investment. So that is things like land acquisition and working with private development and nonprofits on housing, that sort of stuff. Debt service and oversight here at 8% is working on those loans and that debt, as well as staff to accomplish the work. Incentive programs at 7% to attract and keep businesses and folks coming to the city of Beaverton, and then 4% for community identity building. Bureau was to be governed by the Bureau Board, Mayor, City Council, 4 community appointees, and as well as advised by the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee and working with the Bureau Budget Committee to review and to pass on the budget each year to the Bureau Board. There's also staff like Executive Director Tweedy, myself, and others who work to get the work done of Bureau. And a lot of work we've gotten done since 2011. Added assessed value to the area. Now we're over $1 billion. I think it's even more than that now. I need to look at the most recent tax roll numbers. We've helped over 100 businesses receive grants through both the storefront and tenant improvement grant programs. We've really contributed to catalytic redevelopment, like projects like redeveloping Westgate, the Hyatt House, and Arc Central. We've improved transportation infrastructure with Beaverton Central Garage and Western Avenue, as well as future projects coming up like Milliken Way Extension and the Loop, and then increased housing in the district by supporting the Mary Ann Affordable Housing Apartments and encouraging other private multi-use housing development. So what does this look like? Well, you've seen this before, some of you, since 2011. This is what the top-down view of the area looked like for Beaverton Central. It's Canyon Road there on the bottom. And over on the east is Farmington. You can see the station there for Beaverton Central Station right in the middle. And this year, we have the Hyatt House Hotel on the upper left, the Arc Central, over 115 units of housing there. Beaverton Central Garage, New Crescent Street there next to the garage, the Patricia Research Center for the Arts, as well as the BG Food Cartel down on the south, and some properties that you may be hearing more about later as well around them. So when we look at the work that we've done, look at what the plan has said that we are going to be doing, we also need to be keeping in our minds and keeping in conversation the other plans of the city of Beaverton. So the plans like the Community Vision, Creekside Master Plan, Downtown Equity Plan, the Diversity and Equity Plan, Climate Action Plan, City Council's Goals and Priorities, and many others. So in the past, we've taken this together and we've worked with the board to come up with a 5-year action plan. Our last action plan was approved in 2021, and that was our 2020 action plan. And it included 5 strategic priorities: land acquisition, expanded programs, affordable housing, and supporting capital infrastructure. We also, with the help of folks like Tiberius Solutions, put together a 5-year forecast to say, okay, if we're to do this work with the plans that are in the pipeline, and acknowledging that many plans that Bureau undertakes are multi-year plans that build on each other over time, how can we put that into those allocations that we've said that we're going to accomplish? So here is our best work to try to get that all the way to fiscal year 24-25. showing in each of the allocation percentage sections the different areas of work that we were expecting to spend money on leading up until those years. And where are we now? We'll go over this more at a future meeting, but we are now over halfway through our maximum indebtedness. This is a projection that was shared in December, and it shows that we're expecting to be at 51.9% at the end of this fiscal year. And that means 48.1% of our maximum indebtedness potentially remaining at that point. And that's not counting also the things that we think that we've already agreed to do and that are projected to come online for the next several years. So already looking at over halfway very clearly in our maximum indebtedness. So I'm going to pass this back to Mr. Bupnick at this point.
All right. Thank you, Chase. So the next few slides here go over our financial forecast for the future that'll set the stage for you all to make decisions about this next 5-year action plan and what are your priorities and how much you'd like to fund for various projects and programs. So the next slide is just a recap of the historical TIF revenues in this area. And this shows from 2013 to today, how you went from $0 of TIF revenue per year to over $6 million of TIF revenue per year over the course of 1 decade. I have done this work for dozens of communities all across Oregon. Over 100 times I've done these urban renewal projects. I cannot think of a more successful urban renewal plan than the city of Beaverton. This type of growth is unheard of. The ability to fund the major projects that you've done this early in the lifespan of an urban renewal area, it truly is an outlier. It's been tremendous success that you've had. The next slide, we talk about some of the variables that affect our forecast going forward. So we covered earlier that existing property values are capped at 3% growth per year. So if you want growth above 3% per year, you need to have new construction occurring or the expiration of old tax abatements. And you're going to have both of those. So there's a number of properties that were built in years past that were receiving 10-year property tax abatements for vertical housing. And those are going to be expiring in coming years. And you have new projects that have pulled permits or that are under construction right now that have significant construction values that are going to be coming online. Now, when we look at the value of new construction and we look at the value coming on the tax roll, again, there's a big disconnect. That's due to those changed property ratios, which are awfully low. Some of these new construction projects are resulting in demolition of existing buildings, so that reduces some of the value. And then some of them will qualify for these tax abatement programs as well. So that'll reduce the amount of value coming on the tax rolls up front, though 10 years from now, they too will see a boost in their revenues long term. That's all we've assumed in this current forecast. And so we're being pretty conservative. We're not assuming speculative future development. There will certainly be more development happening in this area long term. And so we totally anticipate that the actual growth will exceed what we have shown here. But again, we want to be conservative for these financial projections. So with all of that, what do we look at? The next slide shows the growth here. And you can see very slightly trending down from the historical growth, but still largely continuing on that track. And that just goes to show that once you've achieved such substantial success in an area, that even the 3% growth with some limited new construction and the expiration of old tax abatement benefits really keeps this thing chugging along. And again, I truly believe that there will be other construction projects happening in years to come in the future that aren't factored in here that will shift this orange line upwards with an even steeper curve. So when we look at those projected revenues, again, I always like to reinforce that there are impacts. And so there are foregone revenues to all of these regional partners. And so folks need to be aware of that. Every dollar that comes into the urban renewal area is a dollar of foregone revenue. We show those here, and over the next 5 years, that's projected to add up to 38 million. So roughly 6 million per year now, and growing to be 8 to 9 million per year 5 years from now. The largest jurisdiction that's shown impacted here is the school district, but as we talked about earlier, they are not directly impacted. Those losses of local property tax revenues are offset by increases in state school fund revenue. Beyond that, you see the city of Beaverton, Washington County, TVFNR, and Tualatin Hills Parks and Rec are substantially impacted going forward. So the hope with any urban renewal area is that the types of projects that you're investing in are giving community benefits and growing the tax base to such an extent that when this area closes down, these other taxing districts that have been foregoing revenue for such a long time truly do feel that they're receiving a benefit from all of that sacrifice, that the community is happy with the transformation that has occurred in their downtown, and that the tax base is higher off, so that long term they're going to be receiving more money than they would have without this investment going on here. The next slide gets into some of the nitty-gritty details of your budget and your 5-year action plan. So we mentioned earlier that you don't want to have your TIF revenue and your program income lumped together in the same account. You want to keep those things separate. Well, it turns out there's quite a few revenues and expenditures that make sense to keep separate from a budgetary perspective. And so your agency has 5 different funds, each with specific expenditures and revenues that go into each of them. So your tax increment fund is where your TIF revenue goes and any interest on that TIF. And then all you do with revenue from there is transfer it to your debt service fund. In the debt service fund, that's where you're paying off all of your debt, both the long-term debt that you've incurred, formal borrowings, as well as the short-term overnight loans that we talked about, where the city's general fund loans money to the area and then is paid back from debt service. So speaking of those short-term loans from the city, those tend to be the revenues that show up in the program and activities fund. And that's how you're funding day-to-day operations here. The programs that you fund relatively small, consistent amounts on an annual basis. So that's going to be your tenant improvement program loans, affordable housing partnerships, and those sorts of things are in your program and activities fund. Then there's your capital projects fund. So you could also have short-term loan proceeds from the cities in there, as well as any of your formal debt. Whenever you're borrowing money so that you can go out and do a big public construction project like the parking garage, those revenues and expenditures show up in your capital projects fund. And then lastly, your newest fund that you've created is your parking facilities fund. And this is a little unique compared to other urban renewal agencies across the state, where you have created an asset that is a revenue generating asset. And you've accumulated other similar revenue streams to go along with it. And this is all in this parking facilities fund, but there are expenditures that come along with owning and maintaining that parking garage. And so currently, the revenues and expenditures there require a subsidy of TIF revenue. So there's a transfer going on from your program and activities fund into that parking facilities fund. But the intention would be that long term, that stabilizes, and that parking garage and associated parking programs are actually revenue positive and are generating program income that can be used to fund other economic development activities in the city. The next slide gets back to the big picture. So when we're looking at the annual revenues that we're forecasting each year, and then we look at how much you've already committed to debt service payments each year, so that's debt service payments for the parking garage project, we then show how much remaining capacity you have. And so we can see next year, we're looking at $3.8 million of additional capacity above and beyond your debt service. That grows to $4 million, $5 million, $6 million in the coming years ahead as your revenue stream slowly increases while your debt service requirements stay flat. So this is really the amount of financial capacity that you'll be looking at allocating in your 5-year action plan. Now, it's a little bit more nuanced than that because there's going to be some ending fund balance this year that carries over to future years. And so that'll give you a little bit more capacity to spend. And then you always have the option of incurring more debt. Incurring more debt would allow you to fund other big major capital projects sooner, but at the expense of now having additional scheduled debt service payments year after year. And you could easily see how incurring more debt could start to chew up more of your annual TIF revenue. And we certainly see that there are some urban renewal areas where almost all of their TIF revenue is committed to debt service, and they don't have extra capacity to fund on programs or opportunistic development opportunities on an annual basis because their revenue is tied up in debt service. You are at a point in time where, yes, a significant portion is being spent on debt service, but the majority of your revenue is above and beyond that and can be spent more flexibly on whatever opportunities come up each year as guided by your 5-year action plan. So I think the very last slide of the night, questions for a 5-year action plan. And I don't think there's any expectation that we're answering all of these questions in detail tonight, but that these will be conversations ongoing with city staff and the board. What are the projects and programs that Bureau should be funding in the coming years? What level of funding is reasonable for each of those projects and programs, given the financial capacity that we looked at on the previous slide? And which should Bureau incur more indebtedness, given that it would allow you to fund big projects sooner, but would bring with it the cost of long-term debt service payments? So those are the sort of considerations that'll need to be discussed as you're coming up with this next 5-year action plan.
Well, thank you for that. Extremely educational. I actually wrote down we should bookmark this for any future Bureau member, incoming staffers, or anyone keenly interested in urban renewal to go back and watch this, because that was an excellent tour through the ins and outs of the financing. Thank you for that. We've got some folks here who have questions, comments around that. We'll start, let's see here. Bureau member Olvin, would you like to begin?
I would. So first of all, I want to compliment Nick and Chase for their presentation. I think you've done an excellent job describing the way that tax increment financing works. I would like to make one quick distinction about school districts. While they're not directly impacted at the local level, the entire state school funding system is impacted by every single urban renewal plan in the state. And so those shortfalls that they experience in revenue have to be made up at the state level. So just a quick thing there that's a little bit of a nuance. And then I want to just totally agree with Nick about how fantastic the city of Beaverton's plan implementation has been. And I really think that is because of the tenured staff like Cheryl and Tyler that have really maintained the discipline and commitment to the original plan goals and project allocations. TVFNR and even myself specifically were part of the initial community advisory committee and then the financial working group, and even went on to go and offer testimony at dozens of community meetings to let voters know, what the information was around this and the plan that was ultimately successfully passed by voters, because Beaverton had such a clear vision. And what we have appreciated about the success of this plan is that Beaverton has stuck with their original goals. They have been disciplined, they've exercised some flexibility as new circumstances have arisen and economic conditions have evolved during the course of the past 11 years. But because Beaverton has really stuck with that original formula, it's helped us, because while there isn't a tax increase associated with tax increment financing, it's very likely we're going to have to seek a local option levy increase, in part due to all the urban renewal plans in our district, because it does, as you saw, it's $4 million for us in foregone revenue, which is, more than 2 years operating expenses at a fire station. It does impact us. And while we want to bet on the long term, not all plans are administered the same. Beaverton has done an outstanding job sticking with the vision. And I really want to say from a special district standpoint that that's why I think you've been so successful. So thank you so much for the expertise and the presentation, and moreover, the discipline and the consistency that staff have been and the elected leaders have executed during the course of the past 10 plus years. That's it for me.
Let's see here, Councillor Duggar.
Cool. Thanks, everybody, for the really great presentation. Follow-up question. So I believe Nick mentioned that we have to spend the dollar amount approved by the voters in the categories. So that's that 48% transportation and infrastructure, 33% joint investment, et cetera, et cetera. So applying those formulas to the 150 million, where are we at, like on the categories, right? If we're obligated to those particular numbers, I'm assuming it all hasn't been spread evenly, the 70 some odd million that we've spent. I think as we think about action plans, like knowing what available bond indebtedness per category would help me. I don't know if there's an easy answer to that, or if maybe I'm misunderstanding, but that'd be really helpful.
And Councilor Duggar, I'll jump in real quick on the allocations. We will be bringing that to you in February. We're still kind of figuring that out, that we weren't prepared tonight to share that. What we can do is go back and look and see what it was in 2020 when we did our last annual report.
Okay, yeah, I think that'll be really critical for me, particularly, yeah, just so I can figure that part out. But thank you for this; it's really helpful.
Councilor Hudson?
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. And yes, Beaverton has the best staff. We know that. My comment won't be new for staff, but will be for the first time for the Bureau Board to listen. I shared this feedback last week. 2020 strategic plan. I don't know if many of us were there for that. I could tell you that I wasn't, and I'm one of the more seasoned people. So as we think about our strategies and priorities, I'd really like us to think about a reset as a group, whether that is a in-person gathering to really understand more about Bureau, talk a little bit about strategy. I think so much of the vision came from the past. I think there's a lot of really great ideas, and I think that we just have so many newer faces that potentially want to build on those ideas. And I think, if there's an appetite sometime this year for us to meet together to talk about what that looks like, I'd really be supportive of that. The questions that were on the slide feel too big to answer in a couple minutes in boxes in this kind of setting. So thanks so much for this presentation.
Mayor Beatty.
I thought we voted on this plan in 2021. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, the plan itself was 2011 is when it.
No, the 5-year plan.
Oh, the 5-year plan. Yeah, it is the 2020 annual report. So an action plan. So the annual report was looking back at 2020. It was in 21 when we did the last action plan. You're correct.
So half the current council was here when we voted on this plan in 2021. Interestingly, this is probably the first campaign I worked on in the city back when we were passing urban renewal. And so really thinking about, this was a great presentation. I've seen an iteration of this a few times over my years here on council, but I think it really gives us a good grounding framework of what we told the community. Who knows why in the 70s they didn't want urban renewal? I have no idea why the council would put it in the charter. They couldn't do such a successful program like this, which is really amazing to me. We've thought, and we've had this conversation over many different boards over the last few years of how much debt to take up front. We could go in and we could hit our maximum indebtedness. We could do some really great things, but we really wouldn't be positioned in the future to be able to utilize this money for seizing opportunities. And while City Hall wasn't purchased with Bureau funds, it's a great example of the city being disciplined and having funds in reserved. I mean, we bought City Hall for around $8 million. Can you imagine purchasing that now? Because past councils kept money in reserves and were disciplined to think about what the future might look differently. I can't imagine if we were still at Griffith Hall as a city and what we would do, or the building we would have had to purchase to accommodate. And we're outgrowing the building we're in now. So I think, being disciplined and spending the money slower over the next couple of years, because our community is changing so much. The other thing that was kind of missing from the report, but for us to think about, we've been able to use this money as a force multiplier to go get more federal funds. Having money on transportation on the loop meant we've been able to now go after almost $7 million of federal grant money, because part of the requirement is having seed money to do that. And so the money is worth far more to us than just spending it all at once for future grant opportunities. I'm thinking about We've not spent a lot near Allen Boulevard. We've spent very little in West 5 in our areas of opportunity. We know we have big pieces of industrial land coming into the city with the sale of Tektronix, and our ability to navigate and fuel those areas to create economic development and job growth is going to be directly dependent on this board's decision on how we operate in the next couple of years. So just a little bit of where we've come from. And I also really appreciate Cassandra's talking about the impact of special districts, because we promised them THPRD, that we would be collective in our decision making on how to spend this money. So great presentation. I think I agree with Councillor Tivnon on giving this to incoming people. I don't know a lot of people out there just thinking about urban renewal all the time, but I do think this would be a good case study for everyone coming in to look at. And I just feel immense responsibility in spending this money is what I take away from it.
Thank you for that context and background. Councillor Hartmeyer-Prig.
Thank you. Nick, I can't remember the questions on your last slide, so I can't really attempt to answer them because my brain is a little full from all of the great information. But I think that was a huge takeaway for me too, is like the commitment that we made to the voters and to the special districts that, you know, agreed to defer their tax increment over the lifetime of this. So it's, you know, to know we're about a third of the way into the district, into the program, I guess, and half the way into the money also makes me want us to make sure we're just so intentional about this 5-year plan, because it gets us to that midway point. I also think it's so important for us to plan for the future as much as we can. I asked staff recently, like, well, can we kind of make a savings account for this or that, you know, having that planning. Thank you, Chase, for putting the questions in the comments. Having like the forethought, I think now at $150 million in 2008 felt like probably a ton of money. And now it just doesn't feel like very much money, right? Things have changed so much. So I think being as intentional as we can, I guess I'm curious if some of the funds, like for the way our budget is set up and the funding works, like can part of it be kind of like a project fund for like to be determined, right? That we're kind of just putting money aside so that we can be ready for opportunity and being able to be responsive to our community. And then I think like for me, waiting on incurring more indebtedness, it feels to me a little bit like the mortgage, you know, and you see like your payoff, you're not making a dent for such a long time. And so like it's great to see that we have that little more, right? That we're actually going to be getting so much more TIF over these next 5 years. But yeah, I would want us to be just super intentional with it, because I think being intentional is what has made this program so successful to date.
Thank you. Councillor Kimmy.
Yes, that was most, I guess, great presentation for me to know the background and how it was all created. I have a better understanding. Thank you so much for that. But also I have some questions. Maybe I'm the only one who doesn't know, but can you give me an example of the program income? What do you mean by program income?
Yeah, so the most common examples of program income are proceeds from land sales and then rent received from property that you own. But then also very common are whenever you have your own loan program. So you're making loans to businesses. I think it said that over 100 businesses have received loans or grants from the area over time. Any loans that you give out to businesses as they repay those loans, that's also program income. So it truly is any revenue that the district winds up having their hands on other than tax increment financing. But those are the most common ones. And they're usually from real estate transactions and loans that you make to private entities.
Okay, so thank you so much. To follow up with that question is that you're saying that we could use this Bureau money to invest in make investments, and then with the proceeds and income, we could use that as a city general fund?
Well, so somewhat. If you close down the agency, the true agency, not just the district, then any remaining funds do wind up going to the city general fund. The city inherits the resources of the agency. But if the agency is going to continue to be open, then the agency would essentially have its own general fund of the program income and would be able to spend it on any economic development or housing activity that the city council designates as an authority of your urban renewal agency. In addition, the agency can always use these funds to spend on projects and programs that are already identified in an urban renewal plan. So you've got, transportation projects. We just heard a comment about how $150 million sounds like a lot of money, but given how expensive projects are today, it doesn't go that far. And so there could be projects that you could see that you don't quite have enough tax increment finance revenue to be able to fund, but you can use your program income to help fill the gap on them.
Right. I guess, thank you so much. One last question is, on the slideshow, I saw that maybe 4% was to be used as a city building or government building or something like that you could use
community building. Community building.
Community identity.
Give me an example for that. And then have you ever used the money for it?
That would be like gateway signage. I'll just go to the plan here. Streetscape improvements, creek enhancements. Those are kind of the big categories that are within that 4% for community identity.
Oh, so that's like those, not the building itself or something.
No. Yeah, it's more of a beautification. So we have some of the streetscape enhancement projects that could happen, or adding of street furniture and doing directional wayfinding signs is another good example.
Yeah, there's the reasons why I asked this question, because even though Bureau is doing wonderful, we're doing great job, the city is having a budget deficit. So I somehow trying to find the good way to not use the funds, but supplement the city to better job of funding the city. So that was the gist of my question. But thank you so much for your answers.
Councillor Teeter.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make a plug for a lot of the conversations that have been happening with advocacy from the community for a multicultural center here in Beaverton. I would love for us to look at how Bureau can be a partner in that work. I think a lot of the goals that people have shared for a multicultural center fit all but maybe the transportation goal for Bureau. And I think there's an opportunity here for us to have a real conversation about what that sort of partnership would look like. Maybe it's Bureau owns and leases the land or leases property to a group who rents out the space, and that funding comes back as program revenue. I don't know. I just want it to be on our minds as board members here and for staff listening too, that this will be a top priority of mine, and I would love to see how Bureau can play a part.
Councillor Duggar.
Yeah, just a quick clarification. Nick, you mentioned that if the city completely closed down the agency and then those funds would go to the city, would those program revenues at that point still be geographically restricted to the former the TIF area, or could they be used anywhere in Beaverton at that point?
So if that were to occur, you would want your city attorney to provide you a legal argument for how those funds could be used. My non-legal opinion is that you likely would have pretty broad discretion on how those revenues could be spent, and that they would likely be treated like general fund revenues. But again, at that point in time, you'd want your city attorney to put that in stronger wording for you.
Okay. Yeah, not that I'm advocating for that. I just like it popped up on my list of things. So thank you.
Councillor Hassan.
This is just more a question, like what do the next steps look like? Because I'm looking back at your questions and I don't know that we had like specific next steps for you. Like what do you see your next steps as? And then I can make a follow-up comment.
Tyler, I think that one's in your court.
Yeah, no, certainly. Yeah, we have kind of what we've planned out was tonight was to do this introductory refresh, get everybody kind of on that same page. And we're looking at February as our next time we're coming back to the Bureau Board and having a more of a discussion of where we really are. We knew that this was going to be a long session, and it was just a point in time to get everybody's feelers out. And as we start to put together the Bureau budget, it's a very important conversation, but we want to get to that 5-year action plan if the board decides that's what you're interested in doing.
Okay. I mean, I just want to echo, like, to Councillor Teeter's point, like there has been an appetite around our discussion around a multicultural center. I don't know that this is the space for that right now, but certainly want to make sure that it's on our radar, which kind of goes back to my original comment around, like, is there a retreat or some opportunity for us to come together and really talk more about what this newer council and newer Bureau Board wants to see in the next 5 to 10 years. Thanks again.
Any other questions or discussion? Okay, I'll round things out. When I was running a few years back, I killed a small tree, printed out every single report that the city of Beaverton had produced that was still live and in action, and this was one of them. I realized a lot of stuff, it's hard for this to stick. It's very dense, it's very complex. Tonight was a wonderful refresher. And it did make me think I need to go back and reread that. The great thing about our website is all of the plans are findable there fairly easily, including this one. If you just put in urban renewal in the top search bar, it takes you right to the page, and you scroll down just a little bit, and then the plan's in there. I second the comments about having some sort of meeting of the minds around this. I think we do have a council that in its new cohort could be together for a long time, and I think we're anxious to get going on what that would look like over time, and that's both in terms of our retreat coming up for the council and in terms of our work with Bureau and the members on it as well. I think that our spending power has been so deeply compromised in the last handful of years that that's something that to the point about being just conservative and slowing our roll a little bit so we can get our heads wrapped around that doesn't sound like a bad idea. But I guess I'd look towards Tyler to and of course our executive director Cheryl Tweedy to kind of guide us in what a conversation would look like to steer us towards staring out the horizon in the same direction over the next handful of years. So with that, unless there's anything further, I'd like to thank Nick Papanek for joining us tonight. This is a full circle moment. You're the one who taught me about tax increment financing way back when. And thank you, Tyler, for your time as well. Is there anything else that you need from us tonight?
No, I think we have been able to gather your comments. We'll go back as staff, have a discussion. We'll think about how we want to approach February. We recognize you have a very big weekend coming up with your retreat. I think that's valuable for all of us at the staff level too, of understanding where council is. And I think that will help guide us a little bit more. And so we'll take that and what we've heard tonight and talk to Cheryl and Jenny and see where we want to go from here. We sure appreciate it. And thank you, Nick.
Great.
Thank you all.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We will now be moving on to the executive director's report. Ms. Tweedy, do you have any items to share with us tonight?
Good evening, Chair Tivnon. Yes, I do have a couple of items to be sharing with you tonight. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for bearing with that very long presentation and your very thoughtful comments and questions tonight. It's really gratifying as your staff person to see how you're grasping this really complex information. And we know that you'll be making good decisions for the future of Bureau, whether it's a 5-year action plan or something else. I also wanted to say thank you to Eric. I'm not sure if he's still on the line for his excellent presentation regarding the URAC's work this past year. Our staff really do rely on the URAC and the guidance that we get from them. They are a key part of how we do our work with Bureau and how we communicate with our community. So kudos to the URAC team and to Eric for his presentation. Board Member Teeter, welcome to your first board meeting. Nice to have you here. Look forward to many more meetings to come. And also want to say congratulations to Chair Allison and Vice Chair Sarah Walton in your roles for the coming year. Look forward to spending more time with Tyler and I as we will prepare for meetings and need your guidance and want to help you as you lead these meetings. I do have a few project updates for you tonight. You may recall at your last meeting, you approved a lease for a tenant called Gray Raven to be the first tenant in the Bureau Garage ground floor commercial space. I wanted to let you know that that lease has been executed and the tenant is anticipating being open in, mid-February. And so really excited to see that first new use coming into our garage and continued activation here at Beaverton Central. Secondly, and Eric took a little bit of my thunder on this one, but I wanted to let you know that we are about to launch some pretty significant changes to the storefront and the tenant improvement programs. You approved a whole new framework for these programs at your October meeting. And one of the fundamental premises is to help these programs really be more consistent with our newly adopted downtown equity strategy. So putting a more comprehensive equity lens in how that program is operated, who's eligible, and how the resources are allocated. Katie Kayatomi of our staff has led that work. I think it's been an excellent effort to complete phase 1 of the framework that you approved back in October. We'll officially roll this new program out towards the end of February, but a lot of hard staff work has gone into it. And later this year, we'll give you an update on how the program is doing and give you some key metrics. I also wanted to give you a quick update on our Beaverton portfolio redevelopment strategy body of work. We talked about this late last year. As you know, this is a piece of work to take a look at the various Bureau property holdings and assemblages and identify their opportunities, their constraints, hear from our community, what our community is interested in seeing on these properties. And then we'll come back to you probably twice, first with the draft report and then second with the final report to get your input on this body of work and the direction that it's taking. We've selected a team led by Cascadia Partners, which is a COVID certified team here in Oregon. And we think they're going to do a really fantastic job. Like Nick, they work in a lot of communities around the state, so it's great to have that expertise and understanding of what other communities do as well. And that really much covers what I was hoping to share with you this evening. Happy to answer any questions, and thank you again for your really attentive listening and questions this evening.
Thank you, Cheryl. Are there any questions for our executive director? Okay, then, thank you. And that's fantastic news. We're getting our first tenant in the garage space. It's going to be great to see it activated. And with that, we will now be moving into executive session in accordance with ORS 192.6602E to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions. Pursuant to ORS 192.6604, it is the Bureau Board's requirement that the items discussed not be disclosed by media representatives or others. We will not be taking any action after executive session. Our next meeting is on February 28th, 2023. So for those who have been listening in, good night, and I will see everyone else in executive session momentarily.